Heidegger as the Vishnu of Western thinking and the problem of the Nishtet in the thought of Christ Logos. Gandhi has said in his so-called biography in the book that's put down as his biography that if you look at the beginning of that book, in the introduction, he says, we Indians don't do that. So Hindus don't do biography. So that would be a pollution for Gandhi to actually write a biography. It doesn't notice the goal of a yogi bringing about samadhi does not concern itself with puritanical or even Aristotelian ethics. So Gandhi doesn't faze him in the slightest that he's deceiving this publisher. So I have to get the book published. It's totally polluting to me if I would actually even go the step in the direction of writing a biography in the Western sense. Hindus don't do that kind of thing. But I don't care. I just want to get the book written. So we want to call it a biography, call it a biography. So the idea here is, if we're on our way to samadhi, if we're on our way to this final stage in overcoming Maya and however it is that Hindus must do in their dwelling, surely bringing further importance, further weight, Vishtish, to this horrible notion of the importance of history, historiology, historicism, biographies of the great men, of this, etc., etc. This would not be helpful. So it's actually from, if you superimpose a kind of Catholic or a Jewish guilt-centered notion on it, you'd have to say this is actually really a betrayal. This would be a betrayal if one were to undermine the very mission for which the Hindus have oriented themselves in their ethos or in their way of living daily, in their, let's say, in their dharma. The dharma is more appropriate. So here we see something quite different from, but it in a way opens a door and lets us see by comparison what we're talking about in this notion of Christ Logos. So if Christ Logos means then that we begin first by noting that being is not something super added to the thing. So we take this Socratic position where it's not that people have knowledge, so that knowledge is like some little thing in the prefrontal cortex or what have you, or in, like, there's a species of neurons which are the knowledge neurons or something. It's rather that Socrates says to know and to do are the same. I think it's more, that's the way he's putting it. It's unclear. It hasn't been worked out, and all these kind of distinctions between what knowing doing or knowing being and etc. This is actually where they're starting to be, the language game is starting to hone in on them and key into them and take them as a force to be dealt with. So the having of knowledge becomes the being wise. So in a way, this is actually, in my view, this is actually shows that the big dispute about nominalism is in a way not what it presents itself as. It's just that these fluctuations happen. Sometimes one wants to look at the knowledge separately, and then people start to complain and they say, but that's taking us away from the primary project of being this dwelling. You're putting you're intellectualizing, in other words. So taken from that position, then one can see how the Occam introduced this saying that basically one doesn't need to set the thing predicated aside in a different realm as an idea. One can just say the thing here actually, say Socrates actually is a worldly wise man, phronimos. He's actually a phronimos. It's not that Socrates has some kind of faculty, and that sometimes he activates it and then sometimes he doesn't, or that there's some difference. But then this desire to come back into the wholeness of this vision. But then how does this work when we compare it to this idea that Christ Logos is then on atomistic analogy with being? So we have this idea of analogy in Thomas words. One can say some things are good, so it's health, and then on analogy, this goodness is less than the goodness of the perfect goodness of God. But on analogy, this is something that links us to God. So we have like a lesser degree of good, more in the direction of shadowy existence. But nonetheless, it points us to the true good. So this vision, I want to say, is when we think of Christ as the good dwelling. So in other words, Christ is understood as, if you were Christ. So that's why we have all these books on the Imitatio Christi and the this Pilgrim's Progress and all these things, and also actually living priests who miraculously bring themselves, at least in some way, proximal to this dwelling. So it's a dwelling. It's not a something that's super added, like a neuron that's the faith neuron or something. It's the whole thing. So in this sense, the issue I would raise is a very specific one. Is the very idea of Christ Logos, Christ as the good dwelling. It contains something which isn't complete. It contains something which forces us to step out of it, which is the agathos, which is the good, which is even the agathos must support even the idea of the idea. It's this extra thing which also then makes the whole account seem to also be doubtful, which means it's also the nish-nish-tet, the nothings in proximity to this Christ Logos. So supposing one were actually in that Christ Logos state, one would, I believe, still have this nish-nish-tet available, which is to say one, in fact it's shown in the text, right? So this is what when Zizek and Peterson, it's brought out, is that Christ actually doubts of his own godhood on the according to some interpretations. I'm not sure if that's meant to be, I wouldn't accept that if it were merely meant to be the not mine will but thine, but I'm not exactly sure how that's argued, but it is argued that Christ has doubted his even his own existence in the in Catholic theology. So in this sense, we see that this state is then a state that could be set alongside others, such as that of a samana in the forest, who's or yogi, who's gathering the forces of samadhi and coming to the 8th level of these things, and they must not be disturbed in this progression. In this sense, we could see somebody like who we take to be, as it were, um, at least when I grew up, it was like this. It was Gandhi was supposed to be this paramount warrior for everything, um, almost divine, divine, but somehow regarding social movements and so forth. I don't know if that's still held, but if you look into it, then of course you could see that this image, and for California of a certain moment, is not necessarily the same as what it looks like when you look into it, and that when we think of the practice of reason versus irrationality, then we can think of it in terms of installing something in this ultimate figure, which stands for, you see, it doesn't have to claim to be eternal, because there's not even enough room to make that claim. It's just happening as it happens, and only this nish-nish-ted of itself is the or put another way, the question of the multidimensionality of time, the object of time, as it were, is not solved. It's and it's not even necessarily raised as a specific little question within that. That's somehow something that comes in only like in a tertiary way, even after the notion of negation of the total negation of the state. But then all these other little questions like what is time doing here, etc., etc. So it's like Erfahrung rather than Erlebnis or something like this. It's like rise out of the so-called pre-philosophical or unreflective into the properly distinguishing region.